This is Mark Guerrero. Welcome to East L.A. Music Stories, episode 23. My guest today is Fred Rivera, who played with a lot of East L.A. groups back in the early 60s. And he played with a group called the Saints. He played with a group that Edward Olmos, Eddie Olmos as he was known then, led. And he played in a group called Genesis that recorded for Mercury Records. And then he got drafted, and he had a Viet Nam experience, and he wrote a book about it that we're going to talk about. Incredible book. And when he got out, he wound up playing with Delaney Bramlett of Delaney and Bonnie, and Oliver. Good morning, sunshine.
You have to have a good voice to sing that.
Very hippie. And then a group called Little Chris and the Nightcrawlers, and so he's got an incredible musical story, but also the war interrupted it in a very significant way. So how you doing, Fred?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here with you, Mark, and I really appreciate what you're doing for the community, putting this all down for posterity.
You're very welcome, man. I love the background there. You got all the guitars on your right, which is shows your musical side, and then you got the poster from your book, Raw Man, up to your left. And it's an incredible book, and he was even nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. We're going to get into that, but it's the perfect background for you. So
thank you.
There you go. So you grew up in Montebello, right?
I grew up in, yeah, go ahead. It's
which is right next to what we know as East L.A., but it is East L.A., but like I say, the East L.A. where I grew up was this unincorporated no man's land. It wasn't a city, had a sheriff's department. And
it's still like that.
It's
still like that. It's still like that.
Yeah. And Montebello was an actual city, just like Monterey Park and City of Commerce. But East L.A., as we knew it, was this no man's land, which was cool. That's where the music boom happened. But Montebello is certainly part of East L.A. and the bands that came for there are East L.A. bands. Like I say, that can be said also of San Gabriel, Pico Rivera, El Monte, all the way out to Pomona. You know, there were Chicano areas and where a lot of East LA circuit bands came from. You know, it's all east of LA. That's the greater East LA area.
We lived on the south side of Montebello, which was the poor section. You know, the north of Whittier Boulevard and south of Whittier Boulevard.
Okay. To the people that lived on my side of the Montebello East LA border, Montebello at that time, back in the late 50s into the 60s, was considered a little bit up the social scale, a tiny bit from East LA. I think there might have been more Anglos living there than in East LA.
There was a lot of Russians, people of Russian heritage, Armenians in the 60s in Montebello.
Yeah.
But like I said, they lived on the north side. Right. Over the south side, down by the Simon's Brickyard and all that stuff, there's a lot of gang activity and but a lot of music.
But you go there now, and Montebello is just like East LA. It's like one thing now. But anyway, so you grew up there in Montebello, and as a kid, you were friends with some people that I've interviewed for this show. The guys that later had a band called the Evergreen Blues, and then Elijah.
Yes.
Hank Barrio did a show with Hank, and they did one with Tom Bray. And you grew up knowing those guys, and you went to Montebello High School with some of the guys from the Evergreen Blues / Elijah bands.
Yeah, my best friend out of that whole group was Steve Lawrence, which I knew as a sax player, and the Cave Band. We were in a band called the Cave Band in the 80s, and it was. I heard of Steve's death on the radio. I was getting into my car, and Gino Michelini, who was big on 95.5, announced the death of Steve Otis Lawrence, and I just was shocked. I was devastated. That was my first real buddy that I lost.
Let's talk a little bit about Steve. He was an extraordinary guy. He was, first of all, he was musically very talented. He was a great sax player, but he also played keyboard.
He's
But he also was a very bright guy and a real doer, man. He made things happen, you know. Tell me a little bit about Steve.
well, like you say, Steve was multi-talented. He would even play the accordion, you know. and but most of my experiences with Steve, he also, we used to call them the kangaroo horns. That was Tom Bray, Kenny Walter, and Steve Lawrence, the three of them. Everybody that knows the music community knows who they are.
And as I mentioned to you, they played on several of my records in the 70s. I sent you the songs.
I heard it, yes.
Yeah, so I was very good friends with those guys. And I first met them when I was in high school, you know, especially Steve Lawrence. I went to his house a couple of times with Rick Rosas, who was my bass player. He was
So you went to the den, the little house in the back.
Yeah. The Bear's Den. But he also was very kind of an addictive personality, and he overindulged in drugs and alcohol, and that's the reason he passed relatively young.
Well, I have to tell you, I was really a part of that. You know, I was as bad, if not as, actually, I was worse, because the night that my first child was born, I was too drunk to drive to the hospital. Steve wound up driving us.
Whoa, and he was drunk too?
Yeah, but he could handle it better.
Hey, tell me the story about you guys going to Dodger Stadium. What happened? You guys went to Dodger Stadium.
Well, we were really into Quaaludes, right? Yeah. And on the Quaalude had Roarer 714 on the pill. And so we went to Dodger Stadium, a group of guys, and he had arranged for the scoreboard to give a big Dodger Stadium welcome to Jack Quack Roarer. and you know, of course, we're the only ones laughing, you know.
Because that was on the pill of the Quaalude.
Yeah. And then but we went to a lot of Dodger games, and one time Steve was just crawling to get up to the next to the parkway there where the stands are, and he forgot something. He went back down, and this policeman looked at me. He says, "Why did you let him do that?" And I said, "Oh, no, he's okay. He's okay. No, I mean, why'd you let him go down again? He had enough trouble getting up to first."
So tell me, what was it like seeing a Dodger game on Quaaludes? I mean, what the hell?
Well, you know, it was an era. Let's just say it was an era, you know, that I went through.
But could you tell what was going on in the game, or it didn't matter?
Oh, I mean, I don't want to tell these ugly stories, but I mean, I would turn around and find Steve, you know, where you crank the condiments. He was putting it in his hand and just.
Okay, enough said.
That's enough said.
I get it. Yeah, that makes sense. So you went to high school with the as you said, the kangaroo horns. Because some of the other guys, did they go to Montebello too?
Sammy Lombardo went to Montebello.
Drummer.
The drummer. And Manny, I just didn't know from school. I just knew Manny was a great singer. And I knew Evergreen Blues was a great band. We used to play, and my band was called The Saints. Mm-hmm. And of course, you remember the Battle of the Bands, mm-hmm. And every city had a Battle of the Bands. So the Saints won the Montebello Battle of the Bands over Elijah.
Ooh.
And Hank told me.
Well, they weren't Elijah then; they were the Evergreen Blues, probably, right?
Okay, well, it was in high school.
Yeah.
Hank said, "That's just because you're dating Miss Montebello."
Well, maybe. Yeah.
But we won the Battle of the Bands in Monterey Park.
Okay.
The Saints was comprised of Montebello and Monterey Park. You know, we have to throw Monterey Park into the whole mix. We got the Atlantic Square, you know, meeting right up to it. and East L.A. College.
And Monterey Park was even a little bit higher over the social scale, especially
Yeah,
Monterey Hills.
yeah, the hills. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
So what about Joe McSwain? Did you know him back then, the bass player?
I was never really close to Joe. Um, I think he went to Cantwell. Did he?
I'm not
Not.
sure. I'm
Uh,
not sure.
I wasn't really close to him. We were like bass players, our friends automatically.
Yeah, right.
Backstage,
Right.
because
We hadn't mentioned yet that you were a bass player. So I'm glad you mentioned.
yeah, I'm a bass player. Even though in my old age, I reverted to guitar. I started my career as a guitarist, and you might find this interesting, Mark. Bill Patapoff was the bass player with Pacific Ocean, and he quit on stage. On stage, he quit, packed his gear up, all the crowds looking at him, and by some sort of miracle, a fellow named Mike Port showed up at the front door holding a Gibson bass, and he said, "Anybody want to buy it?" And so the waitresses took a collection among the audience, our fans, and they bought the bass for me for $100. And the guitar player was Kent Henry, and there was no way he was going to switch to bass. And Kent Henry, I met at East L.A. College, and we both worked at in Monterey Park at Johnny Thompson's. But getting back to the story, I learned how to play bass on stage. I looked at Kent. I said, "What do I do?" He says, 1, 3, 5. And that was it, 1, 3, 5.
So
And
before we get too ahead of ourselves, I didn't want to
yeah,
leave out Hank Barrio. Did you know Hank Barrio from the Evergreen Blues and Elijah, big guitar player?
I knew Hank Barrio when we were label mates on Mercury
Okay.
Records.
Okay. Yeah. So you were mainly friends with the horn section growing up, mainly. Yeah.
And Sammy.
So then you joined the Saints. That was your first band. And who was in that band, and what were the venues you played?
Well, it's good that you asked me that, Mark, because I had kept my gigs from high school.
I got
I
those
was
too.
very organized,
Yeah.
and the Saints was originated out of Montebello High School. Phil Amador on drums. He was the original drummer. Danny Loya on guitar out of Pico. And Dave French, one of the rich guys in Monterey Park, Monterey Hills, on vocals and sax. And then we had various members, Louis Marconi on the Farfisa organ.
Had to be a Farfisa.
Had to have a Farfisa. And it was a guitar player. Bob Herman was a bass player because I was playing guitar. Wayne Myers, if you've ever heard his name, he played bass. As a matter of fact, our first gig, I have a photo of our first gig. I looked like a child.
You were a child.
Yeah.
How old are you, would you say?
When I was 12 years old, I had a neighbor who everybody called the foster kid. And, don't hang around with them. But I was attracted to that, And so he had a guitar and he didn't know how to play it. And he gave it to me. And I didn't know how to play it. So I started to take music lessons in Montebello at Palmer Vina Studios. And that's where I learned how to play guitar. And he was a very in-depth teacher, taught about music theory, taught everything. Really a great teacher. I learned a lot about teaching from him.
Mm-hmm. How old were you when you actually played in the Saints?
15, 16.
Okay. And
yeah.
what venues did you play?
Venues, well, we played all of my dad's company picnics, all of my uncle's events, and of course everybody played the Armory in Montebello. the big echo chamber, and St. Alfonso's, and
Oh yeah.
But I kept a log, like I said, and I've heard the name mentioned on previous shows, the Podler brothers
Oh
at
yeah.
American Entertainment and American Recording.
Richie and Don Podler.
Yeah, Don had the entertainment portion, and Richie had the recording.
Yes, Richie had the big time side.
Yeah, but who was making the money? It was Don.
Yeah, it was little money compared to Richie. He produced Steppenwolf and Three Dog Night, for God's sakes.
Well, I have an interesting story that we'll get to later about Kent. Witnessing Kent Henry play that iconic solo on "Ride Captain Ride."
Nice.
You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, great one.
And watching him fall off the stool as he's recording it and not miss a lick.
Oh, you were there?
I was there.
Wow.
So the Saints were working with Don Podler out of American Entertainment. I was the band leader, so I'm the one that always dealt with Don. And I've got this little book here where we did gigs, and it says Saints, $60, Don Podler, 10, and that's little money when we think about it. But $50 for a band was pretty good back in those days.
Yeah, and $10 each wasn't so horrible.
And the Saints, we played a lot of fraternity parties and a lot of sorority parties. We played the Don Podler circuit of the what was it called? The Dixie ballroom, the
old Dixie.
Yeah, the old Dixie ballroom, and that was a good gig.
So was that before? Because I played with bands that worked for Don Podler as well, and so many of my friends did also. And when we were doing it, which was around 69, 70, he was booking people fraudulently as famous groups. He'd get some random group and say, okay, you're Steam, Nana, hey, hey, goodbye, or you're the Outsiders. And the groups show up and play and get paid, and nobody knew the difference.
Mark, do you know how many coasters and drifters that we backed up?
Yeah.
Different guys every time.
Right. So did you do any of those where you guys went as another band, or was that before?
No, we did that. The Saints did back up the coasters.
Right, but you didn't go as a group. See, we would go as the Outsiders or
no, we didn't go as
that's what I'm saying. I think you worked
with his background.
Yeah, so you did it before people I knew and before we did it. So so he probably didn't figure that out. He could pull that shady business till later.
Yeah, well, 69 and 70, I was in Vietnam.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But after we graduated in 1966, the Saints basically broke up. And Eddie Olmos, his name is Edward James Olmos. Right. So he used to go under the name Eddie James. He'd use his middle name as his last. And he's my primo. He's my cousin by marriage. He married my cousin's husband. I messed that up. Eddie's brother married my cousin. So all my life, Eddie's been included in all family functions. We've been to baptismos, weddings, funerals, the whole thing as a fan. He likes to think that he bought my first baseball glove for me, and I let him think that. But it makes him feel good. But so after graduating in 1966, Eddie had a band called The Hand, and I joined that. Danny Diaz, who worked at Johnny Thompson, that's where I know Danny from. He's an extremely talented guitar player.
And I did a show with him, as you saw.
Just really steeped in knowledge of music, and always been a great guitar player. After The Hand, it didn't work out. Eddie said, I know he said this publicly before, but he says, Freddie, he says, what's the biggest thing on the West Coast? The Pacific Ocean, and that's who we're going to be. And we started out as Pacific Ocean, and the only gig that I remember us doing was Gazzarri's, and we played Gazzarri's 6 nights a week for a year.
And what year would that be? Roughly?
That was in 1967.
I played there in 68, so right after you.
Wow, really? At Gazzarri's?
Yeah. With
Did
my
they
band,
still-
it was band was called 1984 in 1968.
Did they still have the go-go dancers?
No, we didn't have any go-go dancers.
We did. I was just looking at a photo of it. It was weird to see that. But we were successful in that we grew a audience. Like I said, we had an audience that virtually bought me my first bass. And so Eddie is a driven person. He's talented. And here's a story. This fellow came in and he approached us. He wanted to manage us. And he invited us to his apartment in Hollywood. So we go there and we're talking to the guy. The guy goes to the bathroom. Eddie's wearing a pea coat. We're already scamming around from the guy's apartment. We see this record and it says, for promotional purposes only, do not distribute, right? It's got all the top secret shit on it. Goes in Eddie's pea coat. And so we take it home. We go to my mom and dad's house. No one's home. We lay on the floor. We put it on, and it's Jimi Hendrix.
Wow.
It's Jimi Hendrix's first album. And Kent Henry was such a great guitar player. He could learn those songs, and he could play them like Jimmy. And so at Gazzarri's, we were doing Jimi Hendrix songs before anybody knew who Jimi Hendrix was.
Wow. So a lot of people don't know that Eddie Olmos, who's known obviously as a very successful actor, Edward James Olmos, that he was a musician first. And a lot of people don't know about this chapter of his life. Now, I've heard that he was quite the performer. I mean, doing quite splits, and you have a picture you sent me of him doing the splits.
Yeah. Anyway, and here's where Foxy Freddie came from, because I became known as Foxy Freddie. And when Eddie would do the splits on Foxy Lady, he'd go down and say Foxy, and when it come up, he'd say Freddie. And then he just started doing that every night. And so all the people started calling me Foxy Freddie. And that name followed me to Mercury Records.
Was it on the label?
Yeah, it's on the label, and they spell it Foxey to make it more British, I guess, or whatever they think. Yeah, and so they called me Foxy Freddie on Mercury Records.
Let's talk a little bit about just the Sunset Strip at the time. You didn't play any other venues on Sunset, or you must have hung around there.
I hung around there. There was I would later, when I went to my next level band, I would play those venues. But when I was playing at Gazzarri's, it was really cool in 1967 when tour buses were coming to look at the long-haired hippies on Sunset Boulevard.
Right.
So anyway, when Eddie started calling me Foxy Freddie, that caught on with the people in Hollywood. And there was not a club on the Strip that I couldn't walk into. They all knew me. The Whiskey, my favorite place to go on a break. Because if you remember, the breaks at Gazzarri's are long.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, we used to alternate with another band. Did you play all night? We would play a set, then another band. So we have the whole set.
With 3 bands.
Yeah, so we'd have breaks in between, yeah. So you must have had really long hair at the time?
Yeah, I had what we considered long hair. I mean, what we considered long hair back in those days was not long hair, but we were considered long-haired hippies. And so it was I met Kent Henry after, and I'm going to go back, after high school, when the Saints broke up. I started to go to East Los Angeles College, and that's where I met Kent Henry. And he's a fantastic guitar player. He would go on to play with Steppenwolf. He'll go on to play that iconic guitar solo in Ride, Captain Ride. I first met Kent Henry when he was a teacher, guitar teacher at Johnny Thompson. They had two great guitar teachers, Kent Henry and Danny Diaz, two of the greatest guitar players. And I was teaching bass. Bobby King was teaching drums. And Johnny Thompson's was the happening place. Every English group that came to Los Angeles had to go to Johnny Thompson. Do you remember when they had all those photographs up of all the famous people? And it was the happening place. And an interesting thing that happened during my time at Johnny Thompson is that here I am. I'm a combat vet, right? Because I taught twice. That's going to be confusing.
Yeah.
I taught after high school. I taught when I got back to Nam. So I'll save that for when I get back. Okay. So I met Kent, and great guitar teachers there, great staff. Everybody that came to Los Angeles, every famous group, would make a visit to Johnny Thompson's guitar store, and he would take a photo and enlarge it, and they were all over the store. And Eddie wanted to start this band, the Pacific Ocean, and I brought along Kent. So I brought Kent Henry to Eddie. Eddie saw what a talent he was. And as I said, our advantage there was knowing the whole Jimi Hendrix first album before Monterey Pop, before anybody knew who he was. Now, that makes us kind of like low-level guys stealing that out of the guy's apartment. But we were hungry, and we were looking for something, and that was the thing that put us over the edge.
Yeah, I remember we used to play a Foxy Lady at Gazzari's, but that was like a year later. But we used to
no splits.
No, no way. Didn't you say Eddie got hurt one time doing the split?
Yeah, one time we had to call 911. And he was taken to a Beverly Hills hospital or some type, and he was okay. He just sprained some muscle. Because Eddie would jump. You know how those amps were all piled up because there's other bands. There's like 3 bands gear. And it climbed to the highest amp. And he would jump off the highest amp, do the splits when he hit the floor.
Wow. And that time he didn't, right? He didn't get up.
He didn't get up that time, yeah. He didn't get up.
Wow.
But it was fun, it was really fun.
So how did you leave that group, or how did it break up? What happened?
Jack Tanna was from the Sons of Adam. This is our Hollywood bands. Was starting up a band called Genesis. Now this is pre-Phil Collins,
right?
And Jack had the name, and I brought he recruited Kent. He recruited Kent out of Gazzari's, out of Eddie's band. And Kent told Jack, I'm not coming unless Fred comes. So they didn't have a bass player. I went, and we left Eddie. We broke Eddie's heart. I know that for sure, because I'm still close to Eddie. And just like that, we quit and moved on to this record label, a band that had a record deal. And I think as young men out there on the streets, that's what we were looking for. Everybody was looking for that record deal.
Mm-hmm.
And we had it with Mercury. And again, Evergreen Blues comes into play because we were label mates on Mercury. And Mercury used to be located in the Max Factor building above Hamburger Hamlet.
Mm-hmm.
and they had a day room. They had a rehearsal place. So I'd find myself just jamming with those guys and hanging out in the day room, watching TV, drinking Cokes, you know. We were still kids. We weren't drinking any hard liquor or anything. Not even Steve.
Wow. And it was just a coincidence that you and Steve Lawrence and the Evergreen Blues were both with Mercury Records at the same time. As a matter of fact, in my experience, the Evergreen Blues were the first band that I knew that signed with a major label. And until now, I didn't know that you guys were signed, maybe a little before them or at the same time.
We're at the same time. And Mercury took two different approaches with them. They put them on the road. And with us, they just showcased us at various venues, the Hullabaloo, the Blue Law, this horrible place in Santa Monica. It was all metal. The Cheetah.
What was horrible about it? I thought it was awesome.
The Echo.
Oh, but I saw the Young Rascals there in their prime, man, in '65.
Maybe it's a stage sound, you know how you have a different sound on
It was
stage.
it was a cool venue. People went.
It was the happening venue.
Yeah.
It was the
sound-wise, you're saying it was terrible.
On stage.
Yeah.
There's two different sounds.
Yeah, well, that's pretty big time you guys were playing there.
Yeah. Spirit, the bass player from Mark Andes, and I became connected as, like I said, bass players hang, in my experience.
Yeah.
We hang, And Mark Andes, we did a lot of shows with Spirit.
They were great, man.
Great.
I remember Fresh Garbage.
Yeah.
Song.
Great song.
And of course, Nature's Way, another.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. Yeah.
Great song.
So I'm still friends with Mark.
Oh, cool.
And so we're right now in Genesis. I had a photo here. This is a gig we did at the Orange Coast College. I don't see a date on there.
Yeah. It just says September 27th.
Yeah, but that's the band Genesis right there.
It's got to be right before you went in the Army. So it's got to be, what would that be?
Well, you know what? I had an opportunity when I was in Genesis to do Melody Land. I think we talked about the revolving stage.
Orange County?
So, yeah, by Disneyland. So as the Jimmy Page was with Yardbirds, and we opened for the Trogs, if you remember that.
Yeah, Wild Thing.
The Trogs, and of course the Yardbirds.
Wow.
And so as the Yardbirds are playing, as we're playing, the Yardbirds are setting up, right, and then the stage turns. That was a really fun experience. The Hullabaloo also had a revolving stage. And I remember playing there with the Buffalo Springfield.
Wow. They were my favorites.
Tiny Tim.
Ooh.
I met Tiny. I got to know Tiny Tim. He was a nice guy. A little out there, but nice
Hullabaloo. So if I'm not mistaken, that later became the Aquarius Theater, where Zoot Suit showed, where Eddie Olmos was starring.
That's where Eddie made his debut.
And before it was Hullabaloo, I think in the earlier 60s, it was Ciro's. Wasn't it Ciro's? Really fancy place.
That was the 50s. 50s,
early 60s.
Well, it's a great venue.
Hullabaloo. Wow. Well, you were playing with some big time groups, man.
And then we were with the Family Dog, which is Chet Helms. There were two major promoters at that time, Bill Graham and Chet Helms. And if you went with one, you were excluded from the other. So I was in Genesis for probably 8 months, greatest time of my life. And like I said, we used to go to San Francisco, play the Avalon Ballroom with Chet Helms. And we did the local showcases. But we went in the recording studio, big studio, really huge. I can't remember the name of it, but I have photos that I just recently got from the drummer. And we recorded an album called In the Beginning. And the day it was released, Kent and I got our draft notices.
Wow.
Now, our manager said, don't worry about it. We're going to take care of it. Well, they took care of it for Kent. And I thought they were taking care of it for me until I found myself with my hand in the arm taking the oath.
Yeah, wow. Wow. What a coincidence, the same day, man, the thing was released.
You know, Kent felt so bad that he gave me his J50 guitar.
Wow. Do you think that they purposely helped him out and not you, or it just didn't work for you?
I think that it just didn't work for me. We were supposed to go in, we had filed from a psychiatrist that we were gay. All right. And so
he was more convincing.
Yeah, he was more convincing. And the funny thing is that after I was in the Army and I was stationed after basic training, this guy that worked in medical records, he says, "Hey, Fred, it says on your record that you're queer." I go, "What are you talking about?" He goes, "Yeah, they say you're gay." You know, they didn't have that. They didn't say gay. They said queer. Let's face it. They did that. But so all I got out of the thing from Mercury was a permanent marker that I'm gay, which I'm not. Yeah.
I was going to say too, before we get off of San Francisco, so you were there. It sounds like were you there in '67, the Summer of Love?
Absolutely. That's the year we were there.
Yeah, because I went there. You know, I took a trip up there with my friend Rick Rosas, the late Rick Rosas, the bass player, another bass player. And we went up there. And so I got to experience, Haight-Ashbury in '67, the Summer of Love. And it was interesting. It did seem different, didn't it? It seemed like a new world was coming, little did we know. But, it really was. It was like hippies, wall to wall down Haight-Ashbury. There were no cars driving down, just people handing each other joints, smoking pots publicly, handing out flowers, girls giving flowers. It had that vibe of, wow, we're going to evolve as a human race. And we did. We can get serious about it and say that the hippie movement in the '60s did create some things that moved forward for the environment, for, peace, a lot of stuff, civil rights, a lot of good stuff, Chicano movement, Black movement, all that came out of it. But truly, here we are 50 years later, and it's just as the racism's still there, the fascism's still there. We haven't evolved that much.
Absolutely. I see it every day.
Yeah.
Well,
it's uglier than ever these days, actually.
Yeah. I'm wearing my Ukraine shirt. That's I was thinking, somebody must have marketed Zelensky's shirt. And I looked on Amazon and they had it.
Cool.
So anyway, I digress. So the day I was drafted, my life changed forever. It changed forever. And I knew where I was headed. There was no bones about it. And I'm just really grateful that I didn't go in my first year. It was a 2-year term. I look at it as prison, like doing time for 2 years out of my life. And I went to Viet Nam the second year in the Army. So I was, I guess, more trained or more ready. And I had a combat unit when I got there. And they took us into the back to give us what they called in-country training. And while I was there, I met a wonderful, wonderful guy, became my best friend. His name is Herman Johnson. And the way I met him, I heard My Girl coming out of a boombox. And I walked up there and I go, yeah, I like that. I like that music. And we sat and we started listening to music. Music has been an essential point in my life. And I'm going to tell you how music saved my life.
Absolutely. But before you get into that, I just want to show, so that you wrote a book about your Vietnam experiences.
Yeah, there you go. Raw Man. That's Nam War spelled backwards.
Yeah, Nam War backwards. If you put it in the mirror, it'll say Nam War, but it's War Man. but Nam War backwards. And you see here, Pulitzer nominee. And that's you there, obviously, right?
Yeah, with a map of Vietnam on my face. That's
cool.
That's a map.
So that's his book, and I just finished reading it. It's a fantastic book. It's incredibly well written, and I wanted to mention that you were saying that when you should talk about before you met Herman and the African American soldiers. The white guys weren't too cool with you. Tell about that experience you had.
I would talk about.
They didn't expect you. They didn't.
Yeah.
Didn't accept you.
Being in Vietnam as a Chicano, you know, and I'm not saying like we're alone. There's plenty of Chicanos.
Yeah.
You know, because it's all either black or brown. There's white guys too, you know, but like in the field, everybody gets along. But in the rear area, there's places that were virtually safe in Vietnam, and that's where you would see the tension. You know, I grew up dating Miss Montebello, as I mentioned previously, and her father came.
He was white, obviously. She was
a white guy. He comes to my front door. My dad answers the door and he says, "I don't want your son seeing my daughter again. I know how you Mexicans treat your women." And he stormed off. My dad didn't fight or confront him because my dad knew what he was looking at. Because when my dad grew up in Globe, Arizona, they would let the Mexicans swim in the municipal pool only on the day before they cleaned it.
Right.
And so, you know, you can't cycle that out of a war. But, you know, that's a look into society to see people functioning together. And there was some resistance. You know, I had a fight with a couple of white guys because I was hanging with the black guys. I was hanging with the brothers. That's where I found home.
Right, but I want you to tell the story. I think it's in the book, or you told me, where those two guys called you Beaner or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
Tell that story, and you wound up kind of having a scuffle with one of them.
Yeah. So I'm walking down a little road in the rear area, which is a very safe place. And these two white guys call me Beaner. One of them calls me Beaner, right? And I turn around and I look at him, and somebody hit somebody, right? You know, that's 50 years ago. All I know is that there was a confrontation about me being a Mexican. And I'll tell you what, you know, when we Mexicans got the tortillas and the frijoles from home and we heated them up, they were biased where they wanted that food. my father used to go down on Lorena Bakery,
yeah,
and have them triple or quadruple wrap the tortillas. So they would, and then mail them to me in Vietnam. And we had this plastic explosive called C4, and you take a little piece of it and you put it under a coffee can and you ignite it. And that's how you warmed your tortillas.
So didn't you get into a scuffle with one of those guys, the guy that called you Beaner?
He hit me, you know, and I defended myself. That's all I really want to say about it.
Well, so wasn't that like very early in your?
It was early. It was early.
Yeah, and that's what kind of drove you to the black guys.
That's what drove me. I had this racial encounter with some white boys, and it turned into a scuffle. And I walked away from that, and I was like, where am I? You know, what is going on? And I heard my girl. So I start walking over to where it's coming from, and it's the brothers sitting there listening to the Temptations. And I go, "Hey, I dig that song. I know how to play that song. And they said, sit down. And I became part of the family. And my best friend out of that group was Herman Johnson. It was on September the 6th, 1969, we encountered a battalion of North Vietnamese Army regulars. Up until that time, we had been fighting like civilians, Viet Cong. You didn't know who was who. Now, you know who these guys were. They had brand new uniforms, brand new rifles, and they were just coming off the Ho Chi Minh Trail. We were in an 8-hour firefight. And during that time, I believed that Herman died. And I carried that with me for 47 years until I wrote my book. And when I wrote my book, a active duty sergeant in the Army went to go get an etching of Herman's name on the wall, and he couldn't find it. He couldn't find it. And that set him at task to find Herman. And as he says in that documentary I sent you, he said, there must be over 500,000 Herman Johnsons in the Detroit phone book.
Mm-hmm.
But he found the Herman Johnson. And consequently, I think it was just over a year after that would make it 8 years ago, that I finally was able to get in touch with Herman. And we had a reunion, because Herman, even though he was wounded on that day when I thought he died, never got a Purple Heart. And I looked, he sent me his documents, and it was patched up and returned to duty. I had a great friendship with Herman, meeting him at the wall to give him the Purple Heart that he never got. I worked with the military general and colonels and got that to happen in a quick order.
And you guys renewed your friendship that went on for a few years after that.
Yeah, it went on. He just passed within the year. And it was really, I had become close with his family, and he had become close with my family. That's how deep our relationship was post-war. And as he was dying in the hospital, his sister Sheila FaceTimed me, and so I could say goodbye to Herman. And I swear to God, Mark, the hospital music was playing My Girl as I spoke to Herman for the last time.
Wow, that's an amazing story. Yeah, the documentary footage was fantastic. They actually had the scene of when you guys first met at the door of whatever house it was.
Yeah,
how emotional it was.
We were planning on finishing the movie this spring, but Herman passed, and so that will go unreleased.
Well, that's too bad. That's
into the can.
Great footage. Is there something you can do with it? Can you put it on YouTube or something?
Well, I've got instructions not to share it with anybody, right? But I have to call the filmmakers, because they did a lot of other things too. I went back to Vietnam in 1995. And when I went back to Vietnam in 95, they were the film crew following the group, because that was the first year that Vietnam allowed Americans to come visit.
Wow.
It was the 20th anniversary of the fall of Saigon.
So the first, half of your time in Vietnam or so, you were in the jungle, in the mud, facing horrific situations, and talk about how you wound up getting in the band and working for the USO.
Well, what happened was, and it wasn't working for the USO, it was working for the US government. Mm-hmm. We were still military personnel. Mm-hmm. But what happened is I injured my back. And I called the book a novel because I take some license. The fact is, I did spend more than 2 weeks in the hospital with a back issue. And we were in armor, and Herman and I were supposed to put this god-awful heavy steel plate of armor underneath our track. And my back went out, and we were in the rear. And what happened is that the officer in charge didn't believe me. He thought I was a malignant, what's the word I'm looking for? He thought I was a malingerer, like George Patton, right? And so, but I couldn't move. I was paralyzed, and we got hit by rockets that night. And so everybody was running for the bunkers, and this guy comes running through the hooch and goes, "Rivera, you got to go to the bunker. I can't move." Guy picked me up. Don't know his name to this day. He picked me up and he carried me to a bunker, and he put me flat on my back in about that much water, because it's a monsoon. And it was just, I was laying flat on the back and I couldn't move. And rats were running across my chest, and I couldn't swat them away. And the officer looked at me. He says, "Well, I guess you weren't kidding." And they airlifted me to the hospital. When I was on that helicopter ride to the hospital in pain, I was laying there and I was looking out the side of the window, and I looked down and go, "There's a city? There's a city here? I've been out in the jungle for 8 months, and there's a city, there's buses, there's taxis, I ain't going back. I ain't going back." And so I spent my time in the hospital, and this is really a true story, you know?
This was Saigon, right?
Yeah, in Saigon. I was at the 3rd Field Hospital in Saigon. It's the first city I'd ever seen in Vietnam. And when I was released from the hospital, I went down to a place called Special Services, not Special Forces, Special Services. And I walked in there. The guy says, "Can I help you?" I go, "I want a job." He says, "Yeah, you're crazy. You're in the Army. You don't go around asking for jobs. We couldn't use you unless you were a bass player." I said, "I am a bass player." He says, "Walk down the hall, 3rd room on the left." I walk in there. There's these guys sitting around with no bass player. I pick up the bass. We play "Johnny Be Good," and my life was changed again.
Amazing. And talk about some of the places you played.
Well, what they did was they put us, and there's a few documentaries about this. They called us entertainers with guns or something stupid, because we were armed, because they sent us to places too dangerous to send Anne Margaret
Yeah,
or Bob Hope,
or Bob
right?
Hope.
Yeah. And so we played at basically, I've got a photo of my amplifier.
Well, that's a great photo. Look at that. Oh, that's an album cover right there.
Right there. That's my amplifier. That's the kind of place that we would play. And my granddaughter looked at it and she goes, "Looks like a homeless camp." But we did 2 shows a day for 2 months. I don't remember. I think maybe we had 1 day off, but and the shows were, Vietnam is like a long peninsula, a long stretch. It's narrow. So we played from the bottom, the Delta, all the way up to the DMZ, the demilitarized zone. At the demilitarized zone, I was set up, and you turn around to mess with your sound on your amplifier. I'm getting my tone. I got my back to the audience. And when I turned and I faced the audience, the first thing I saw was a guy standing about 4 feet away from me, looking me in the eye. And the next thing I know, a shot went off, and he was shot in the back, and he died. and I watched him die. And I go, there is no safe place here. I thought I was getting into a safe place, but this is not safe. Nothing in Vietnam is safe. It was friendly fire. There was more to do about the fellow that shot him, because everybody at the DMZ had their locked and loaded, off safety. Nobody could have their gun on safety. His rifle fell and hit a chair. When it hit the chair, it discharged the round, went into the guy's back.
Unbelievable.
They had to airlift the guy that shot him due to traumatic. Can imagine what he was going through.
Yeah, incredible. Hey,
what we did.
The name of your band?
The name of our band, I got to name the band, and it was called the OD Circus, because we were OD'd on the Army, we were OD'd on with the war, and OD in the military stands for olive drab, so that they didn't know we were talking about overdose.
Cool name.
Yeah.
Incredible.
The OD Circus. And I wish I had a photo. Oh, I do have a photo. Hold on a minute. Okay, ready?
Mm-hmm.
So when I was playing in the band and doing 2 shows, this is a photograph of, I call riding to the gig, and I'm on a mule, and you can see the
Can you put it a little more center? This way, yeah. And up
right there?
a little higher. Right there. Okay.
This is my favorite.
Get close to the mic. Okay, go ahead.
This is one of my favorite photos. I call it driving to the gig. But we flew in every kind of aircraft. We flew in Hueys, we flew in Chinooks, we flew in small airplanes. As a matter of fact, we had to throw stuff out of one airplane to clear a tree line. I think I talk about that in the book.
Yeah.
So then what happened is the other guys in the band were not combatants. One was a cook, the other 2 were company clerks that worked in Saigon. I was the only guy coming out of combat. So when it come time to extend the tour, they wanted out. And I had no band, and I had to go back to my unit. And I had to go back to my unit when my unit was spearheading the invasion into Cambodia. And so what happened is I found the person in charge of the rear area in a compromising situation. He was shooting up dope in an empty tent. And I walked in on him. I said, nobody has to know about this. Nobody has to know about this. I think this base could use a nightclub. And I've got experience in the entertainment field. And all I did was get a refrigerator, a TV, and a little bumper pool table. And he let me run that. So I got to hang with all my buddies when they'd come to the rear, smoking dope, just having a good old time. Then the first sergeant out in the field, out in the operations, he heard about me. And he made a special trip to come back to the base camp to get me. And he's chewing me out, yelling his ass off at me. And one of the company, and this is true, it's unbelievable. One of the company clerks came running with a letter, and he says, Rivera, you got a 30-day drop. Nixon was getting people 30-day drops. In other words, if you had 30 days done, you were done. And there's
30 days left, you were just done.
Yeah. And so the first sergeant knew that there was nothing he could do about it. He just looked at me. He said, you son of a bitch. He got the chopper. He took back off to the field. After my back injury, I never went back to the war.
It's incredible, man. But I highly recommend this book. It's just unbelievable. It just gives you a big glimpse of what it was like in the combat situation. But so many miraculous things happened to you. You know, the way you wound up in the band, the way you got to go home early. A lot of ways you got some lucky breaks there too. Plus, you were very smart the way what you did. But your little story that reminded me. Remember that show back in the 50s and the early 60s? Remember Sergeant Bilko?
Yeah.
He was scheming and he would do all kinds of stuff. And
he was a supply sergeant.
So you were like him, right? You had your own little club going.
Movida.
Yeah, there you go. East L.A., baby. Some Movidas.
We know how to play this game, you know.
Yeah. So imagine, you're playing the Sunset Strip and you're playing San Francisco, Summer of Love, and then you're in the freaking jungle in heavy combat for a long time. And then you're playing in bands over there and playing some of the same songs, right? What were you playing? Were you playing Motown?
Thank you for that question, because thank God that I was able to play bass after a year of not playing, right? And or 2 years. But I got my chops up before I came home.
Yeah.
So when I came home, it was easy to find work. And unlike what I heard Hank talk about the Evergreen Blues and Mercury, is that they didn't get any money. Well, Genesis got money. And since I was under either 18 or 21, I turned 21 in Vietnam. When I got home from Vietnam, I had a nice check of $5,000 or $6,000 waiting for me. And with that money, I split to Europe. When I came home, my family picked me up at the airport. I was spat upon, and I was full of anger, and I was full of shame. And when we got to the house in Montebello, there was a big sign that said, "Welcome home, Fred." And I opened the gate to the backyard, and the whole family, my tios, my primos, everybody was there to welcome me home. I couldn't stand it. I ripped the sign down. I ripped the sign off of the wall, and I walked in the house, didn't say anything to anybody. I went to my room, and I closed the room, and I cried. I couldn't face them.
Because of the reception you got and the fact people were like looking at Vietnam vets in a negative way.
I killed a kid. That's a hard thing there was a time when I couldn't say that without crying and getting all emotional. But I've had years of therapy through the VA, years of group with a group of combat vets. As a matter of fact, that's how, I mentioned partying. It was not a party with Steve Lawrence. It was just get out of your mind. And thank God in 1988, I found sobriety,
Yeah. Well, obviously, it was an accident the way you killed that kid, and you tell the story in the book, so it's in the book. But yeah, you also had to kill other people. You killed other people, and it's part of survival.
It's hard to, it's people don't think when it's I can kill you. You don't know what it's like to kill somebody. To kill somebody is to stop them and remove them from this earth. And the thing with the kid is a teenage kid, and in Vietnam there were places called what were they called? Free range or open range. Where anything that moved you shot. You were considered in enemy territory. And this kid was just looking for food at the end of the line, of the column. I saw movement and I shot, but so did another guy. We both shot. And I don't know how he feels, but I feel responsible for it. But it's something that I've learned that I can help other veterans from Afghanistan.
Well, also, I want to mention too, because the story of when you shot your first person, it's so understandable how it happened. Like, because here you were this musician from East L.A. suddenly in Vietnam, and this guy apparently he was in a ditch or something, and he blew the head off of some South Vietnamese civilian, and he started running, and you trained your machine gun on him as he was running, but you couldn't shoot because you'd never killed anybody. And it wasn't until he turned around and aimed his gun at you that you had to shoot him. Survival, man.
Yeah, and the thing about that kid, and I talk about him as a kid because he seemed to be like 14 or 15 years old in the ARVN, that's the Republic of Vietnam Army, and he had bad shoes. I describe it, and he couldn't, and I kind of was attached to him, and the column was facing forward, and I was the only guy with the rear, with a machine gun on the rear.
Yeah.
And so what happened, nobody saw, I saw the kid go check out a bunker. It was a bunker. And he was walking like it was a Sunday afternoon. He's just walking to the bunker, and he puts his head in, and all of a sudden you see his head explode. And you go, "Madame!" And you see the white smoke, and then all of a sudden you see a guy running. And I'm thinking, I can't kill this person. It's a father, it's a son, it's a brother, it's a person. But the moment he turned and aimed at me, I opened up my machine gun.
It's war, man.
But as I say, being in the OD circus in Vietnam, I came home with chops. Okay.
Tell me what songs you did. You did some Motown.
Oh, yeah.
Very...
Okay, we did. The Beatles had just released an album with.
Was it Abbey Road?
Yeah, it was Abbey Road. And so we learned with a really cool bass line with Paul plays.
Come Together?
Come Together. We played Come Together because I love that bass line.
Oh.
And I actually, yeah, I'm going to send you a video because I had a bass line in Genesis that was similar.
Wow.
And a guy contacted me on instant message. And he says, "Are you Foxy Freddy from Genesis?" And I replied, "Yes, I am." He goes, "You're a big influence on me." And he sent me a video of him playing my bass part to the record. And it was like, I go, "Wow, that's a really cool bass line."
Incredible. And you must have been doing some Motown, My Girl, and that kind of stuff.
We're doing Motown. But to be honest with you, the lead singer was an accordion player that wanted to do Men from La Mancha, right? And so the drummer and I had to really sit him down and tell him what was it was about. We got to play My Girl, we got to play the Temptations, we got to play the Beatles, and we're not a show band.
This isn't Broadway.
It's not Broadway, dude. Yeah. So when I came home from Vietnam, and I had this very traumatic incident at my house, it made me start to wonder about everybody. All of my friends were protesting the war, and I'm coming back, and I know exactly what is going on. I've been there, and I know what we're doing is wrong, and we got to get out, and we got to end that war. And so I migrated. I went more on a social thing to Griffith Park. It was a love-in. If you remember the big be-ins and the love-ins, and it was a love-in at Griffith Park. Man, that sounds fantastic, because I was in the summer of love and then got shot out of it to Vietnam, and here I'm back. And so I get to enjoy all the fruits of being back home. So I'm enjoying being a free man, and I go to a love-in at Griffith Park, and there at the site there's a coffin, and all the vets are just ripping off their combat medals and throwing them into a coffin.
And these were Vietnam veterans against the war.
These were Vietnam veterans against the war. And I met them. I hooked up, I joined them. So I'm an original life member of Vietnam Veterans Against the War. They still publish a newspaper.
Wow.
And I only got one bad review on my book, and it was from them.
Really? Why was that? You know?
The review, and you've gotten reviews, right? And so the review starts off with, I'm probably not the one to be reviewing this book. And as soon as you read that, yeah, okay, so why are you?
Right.
And but I when I got back to the world, that's what we called the United States, is I was really into Frank Zappa and the Mothers, and they were doing a concert at East L.A., the hall there, and with Zubin Mehta and the L.A. Philharmonic. So and this is once I become a life member of Veterans Against the War, and I'm anti-war, and I'm at this concert, and I start to get a pain, and like the concert's so good, I just ignore it. Well, I wound up having a burst appendix, and had to enter the VA hospital, and it was really traumatic to be back in that world after I'd come back. You know what I'm saying? And so I started working with little anti-war activities, distributing leaflets, going knocking on doors, working in the community, and a whole movement, the Chicano movement, was happening. The Brown Beret, Before I went to Vietnam, I just saw Black Beret, and I never saw the Brown Beret until I came back. And I was only 22, so I would consider myself part of the youth movement of that time. I got involved after throwing my medals away. We watched, it was another demonstration during the protest that started at Belvedere Park. So I was assigned Whittier Boulevard to be my spot. And in the book, I talk about the Silver Dollar Cafe, but that's a historical thing.
Right. Now you're talking about the 1969 moratorium against the war in East L.A.
Yeah, exactly. But at any rate, I was telling you that I felt really fortunate to have played in the band in the military,
right?
Because when I got home, it was easy for me to find work. Yeah. Now, I told you I went to Europe. I stayed to Europe for 100 days, and I came back. When I came back, I had a full ride scholarship to Pepperdine University. Wow! All through all the programs available, and I got an offer. I went to. There used to be a place called where you got your gigs in Hollywood.
Musicians Contact Service.
Yeah, Musicians Contact Service. And so I go into Musicians Contact Service. I take down a couple of numbers. And this one band, the Love Machine, they were playing on Crenshaw Boulevard at Mavericks Flat, a really good place. And I answer the ad, and I walk in, rolling my equipment across the floor, and the drummer goes, "Hey, that's Fred Rivera. He doesn't have to audition."
Whoa, man.
That made me feel so good.
Wow.
He had been in the Pacific Gas and Electric band.
And
I knew him from my Genesis days.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I got into this band, and it was really a good gig. It was Miss Black California and her court. So there were 12 female singers. And the band, it was at Mavericks Flat. The band was on stage, smoking cigarettes, drinking coffee, whatever, while the girls had to go through wardrobe, makeup, choreography, and we're getting paid for just sitting there. And finally, when the show was put together, we took off for Europe, and we played in Saint-Tropez on the French Riviera
Wow.
for
Gee.
6 weeks. 6 weeks. 5 musicians, 12 dancers. We did that gig. Then we went to Paris, supposedly to go to Japan, but there was problems with our work visas. Hey man, that's not my fault, you know. And so we got paid to stay in Paris for another 6 weeks.
Oh, wow.
And by then the band was, you know how bands get. The bands were, because we were all living in the same room. And when we got to Paris, everybody got their own room and dispersed. And it's
Wow.
like, I'll talk to you in a couple of days, dude, you know. But I walked just about every street in Paris. It was a wonderful experience. The Louvre, going and seeing Mona Lisa. And I just really enjoyed it. Then from there, we went to Japan, and we played at a place called the Akasaka Mugen, really fancy nightclub. And it's an after hours place, open all night. So we did 7 shows a day for 7 weeks. And you talk about chops, man. At the end of that gig, my chops were happening. So we came back home, and there was this singer named Oliver, Good Morning Starshine, and Gene. And that's not his music, you know, that's just songs that were written and he sang. The guy is a great, or was, he passed, was a great songwriter along the lines of John Prine or Steve Goodman. As a matter of fact, he was really good friends with both of them. And I had an opportunity to play Uncle Pen, the bluegrass song with John Prine and Bill Swafford. Oliver, his name was Bill Swafford. He had that high bluegrass voice, you know. It was just so beautiful. You know, some of my best performances have been in front of nobody. So I'll get to that with little Chris, you know.
Yeah.
So that was a really good gig. I think it paid $200 or $250 a week, which was good money in those days. And we flew everywhere, and then we rented a station wagon. There was no SUVs, a station wagon to carry the equipment, and we drive around the South. And during that time is when I got married. I got married in 1974. And right when we got married, that job ended. And I found myself without work. And then what we like to call the disco crisis came and knocked all the musicians out of work. Steve Lawrence and I wrote a song, Is There Disco After Death?
Good one. Yeah, I was going to ask you, was that, you covered a lot of ground there. The group that you went to Europe with, was that the group that you told me about that you were the only non-Black guy in it?
Yeah. And coming from that culture in Vietnam,
yeah, you fit right
I
in.
just fit right in, you know. Plus, I knew the drummer, you know, and really great keyboard player, Johnny Rogers. He was the nephew of Red, the comedian. What's his name?
Which comedian?
The one with always having a heart attack. And
Red Fox.
Red Fox. I'm so sorry.
Funny.
Yeah. So the keyboard player in the Love Machine was the nephew of Red Fox, and he had some really great stories.
So you were mentioning, so you're saying that you jammed with Oliver and John Prine?
Yeah, John Prine. They were really good friends.
Yeah, they were. Yeah, Steve Goodman and John Prine were from Chicago, and they knew
exactly. Yeah. I was really good friends with Steve, my wife and I, and his wife.
Really?
Yeah. And as a matter of fact, we went to go see Steve in concert with Linda Ronstadt in Orange County somewhere. And, you know, when you're friends, you go to the stage door and you knock and you're let in. And I knocked on the door and his wife answered. And she said, Fred, Steve is not feeling good because he was dying.
I
He was
know.
dying from leukemia,
Yeah.
and he can't see anybody. And then a few days later, he passed away.
For those that don't know, Steve Goodman wrote, City of New Orleans when it was a big hit for Arlo Guthrie. Good
Great
morning,
song,
America. How are you?
great
Great song.
lyrics.
I love Steve Good. In fact, I love Steve Goodman's version of it. That's the one I do when I do the song.
Well, Steve was a hell of a guitar player.
Yeah, good
I
singer.
mean, a good singer, and a good songwriter, but he could play.
Then he wrote that song, You Don't Have to Call Me Darling, Darling.
Yeah, John and him, they wrote it together.
Oh, they did? That's
Yeah,
a great song.
they were together, and they said, let's write the corniest country
Yeah,
song.
right.
Yeah.
Like I was drunk when my wife got out of prison or whatever.
Yeah.
And my dog got run over by a darn pickup truck and all that stuff.
We went to Cub games together.
Steve Goodman?
Steve Goodman and John Prine. Yeah.
Oh, good old Wrigley Field. I went to a game at Wrigley Field, and great place.
It was great. It was great.
Wow.
So, with Bill Swafford, I like to call him Bill. Yeah, but Oliver. It's Bill, because, like I say, his music that he wrote was nothing like Good Morning Starshine.
And Good Morning Starshine was from the movie. I mean, from the play Hair.
Yes.
Wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. And he had a great voice. He could sing it.
Yeah. Now, how'd you meet him again? I think I missed that.
Well, what happened is I had a friend named Fred Rivera, bass player.
Yeah, I know he is from Sweetwater.
Yeah, he was with Sweetwater. They played at Woodstock. Anyway, like I say, bass players and bass players.
Yeah, that's right.
And so he calls me up and he says, Fred, he says, I'm going to retire from this band. I've been on the road for years. And do you want the gig? I go, yeah. And he goes, well, it's all charts. And I go, oh, God. And he says, but I'll come over and I'll teach you the songs. And he came over to my house in Alhambra and he taught me, I can read, but I can't cold read, And so he taught me all the songs. And when I showed up to the audition, I went into this room for the audition, nailed it, and got the gig, thanks to Fred.
Yeah. I interviewed Fred one time for a project, and I knew his partner, Alex Del Zoppo of Sweetwater, and he played some shows with me. A great guy. Sweetwater was, they played at Woodstock, man. And
the last time I saw Fred was at the San Diego street scene about 10 years ago. I don't know that he's on social media.
Yeah, a movie was actually made about Sweetwater. Did you know that?
I didn't.
Yeah, there's a movie out. You could probably rent it or find it, but it's a story of Sweetwater. And what made their story, they were so interesting. Of course, they played Woodstock. They did a lot of great things, made some good records. But their female lead singer, something happened to her. She lost her voice and messed up the group.
I didn't know that.
They made a movie about it, yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Before we go on, did you purposely gloss over the Griffith Park thing and the moratorium because we didn't talk about, once the violence started and you getting roughed up, you don't want to talk about that?
I don't like to talk about that. I'll talk about it. I thought there was a lot. There was a lot of anger in the community, and the L.A. County sheriffs were bastards. Yeah, they really were. They really were.
So let's think about this. I mean, on the one hand, it's important to talk about it because we're kind of exposing racism. We're exposing some of the shit we went through, the stuff you went through after the war, and that you would come back from risking your life and going through hell, and then you wind up getting roughed up by some cops. It's kind of a good story, and it's kind of important in a way too. I don't know if you want to talk about it.
Well, I broke a rib. I was in the Long Beach VA hospital.
But do you want to talk about it or what?
Oh, we can talk about it.
I want to touch on, some of the crap that went down. It's important historically. And again, the irony that you get out of the war, you went through all that combat, you go to Griffith Park to a love-in, you get involved, you meet Vietnam vets against the war, and kind of a scuffle kind of broke out, and talk about that. What happened that turned that into a bit of a riot or whatever it was?
Well, there was a lot of anger in the community, a lot of frustration in the community. When this is what I witnessed when I come back from a war, back to my own community, and I had been, before I even went to Europe, my uncle was in construction, and he had me. Remember when they built the sheriff's department on Monterey Pass Road, right in there? All right, so that was being constructed, and I would work on the weekends pulling nails out of 2x4s so they could use them again. That's my big job, right? And this LA County deputy pulls up on me, and I'm a combat Vietnam veteran. And he walks up to me and goes, "How long you been out of the joint, punk?"
Yes.
So, when you're met by that type of hostility from authority, what do? You rebel. And what was great about the Vietnam veterans against the war was that we were Vietnam veterans, and we knew what we were talking about. And we knew how ugly and bloody and messy that war was. And so
what happened?
It was at some type of a protest. I started going to war protests. And at a war protest, we got beat up by LA County sheriffs.
Was that at Griffith Park?
They attacked.
Was that at Griffith Park?
Or Elysian Park.
Okay.
Because both had them. And like I say, it could be either one.
Okay.
But the fact is, it was a peace demonstration that was attacked, like Chicago convention when the police rioted. I think the police rioted in our community. They come running in, gangbusters with their clubs over their head, attacking us and throwing tear gas. And I think I mentioned it in the book. What we knew is that if you urinate with tear gas in your hand and wash your eyes with it, it counteracts the tear gas, because we saw the Viet Cong do that. And so the Vietnam Veterans Against the War was a mighty movement. John Kerry, he was original. John Kerry came out with, "You want to be the last person killed in Vietnam," if you recall. And so I got, a group of us were roughed up. I got to where I had to be taken to the hospital. I don't know how I got there, because memory, there's the fog of war and there's the fog of just that it's been 50 years. My God, I'm 75 years old. I started playing the guitar when I was like 13 or 14 years old. That's a lot of time. And a lot, when I came back from Vietnam, of course, my political eyes were wide open. And when I come home to East L.A., be it Montebello, I can see, I already illustrated one issue of the police coming up to me and calling me a punk,
right,
and assuming that I've been in jail, and so that catalyzed this movement, because how are you going to put up with that?
Right. So getting back to the moratorium on Whittier Boulevard in East LA in '69, that turned into a police riot, and people were clubbed and women were clubbed and tear gas. And what did you experience there in terms of that?
Well, like I say, the Vietnam veterans, knew how to fight their tear gas. And, there weren't, although he got killed in the Silver Dollar,
Ruben Salazar.
Ruben Salazar, but there weren't like publicize the police killings like they are now. You go on YouTube, you see all kinds of police misconduct all over the country.
And now everybody's got a camera in their phone.
Yeah, it's a changed society. I was just telling my wife, I wish I would have had the technology when I was in the Love Machine, because I have no photos of that.
Yeah.
Europe, Japan. Oh, Mark, and the thing about playing 7 sets a night was that whoever played at the Budokan, the big venue in Tokyo, of course, would go to after hours to the Akasaka Mugen. So having known Jimmy Page and the Saints when we played at Melodyland, the whole band came in when we were playing. I swear, Robert Plant, John, the whole
Led Zeppelin.
Led Zeppelin walks in the band, and I want to hide behind my amplifier, because like we're playing some shitty house music, So, but what wound up happening was I wound up sitting with them drinking sake all morning because it was already morning, and Jimmy was cool. Robert Plant had a guy that protected him, a bodyguard, and he would go start some chingazos, and then he'd let the other guy finish it for him. I thought that was pretty chicken shit.
It was real serious chingazos?
Yeah.
In Japan?
In Japan.
So at what point did you wind up playing with Delaney Bramlett of Delaney and Bonnie fame?
Delaney, after Bill Swafford Oliver, I again, my friend Kent Henry, who I met at Johnny Thompson's in East L.A. College, called me because he was playing with Delaney. And I went out to, Delaney had a ranch, the Rock and Roll Ranch, and he had a studio on the premises. So I go in the studio and I play bass, and he doesn't say anything. I go home. I come back the next day. I play bass. He doesn't say anything. The third day, I played something cool, and he stopped the band. And he just stopped the band, and he walked over to me and he gave me a hug, and he said, "Welcome to the band."
That one lick. Oh, that lick.
Yeah, well, he was a interesting guy. I mean, very talented, extremely talented.
Well, let me say this just for those who don't know, because a lot of people don't know who Delaney is anymore. But of course, with his wife, Bonnie Bramlett, who was a great white soul singer, and he was a great funky, kind of an R&B-ish, kind of a bluesy guitar player, singer, songwriter. And they had a big hit, I Got a Never-Ending Love for You.
Yeah.
From now on, that's all I want to do. Huge hit in the early 70s, whenever. But maybe late 60s. But anyway, he got really famous because
Karen Carpenter.
Well, I don't know about that. What happened with Karen Carpenter?
He wrote that rock star song.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's the Delaney song.
Okay, cool. No, but what really made him more legendary was the fact that when he was touring in England, he was on the bill with Blind Faith, and that was the band that was Steve Winwood, and Eric Clapton, and those guys. It was a super group. Eric Clapton had just left Cream and was huge, and they were on the bill. And Eric Clapton loved Delaney's band. He dug them because they were earthy and they were rootsy and they were bluesy. And he was done with the whole psychedelic stuff. So he said, "Hey, I want to hang with these guys." So he quit Blind Faith, and he asked them, "Can I go on the road with you?" So, and then George Harrison was good buddies with Eric Clapton, and he says, "Hey, can I come along too?" So Eric Clapton and George Harrison jumped on the Delaney and Bonnie tour and toured all over England and beyond. They went to some other countries. And you can go on YouTube. Yeah. You can go on YouTube and put in, Delaney Bramlett with George Harrison and Eric Clapton, and you'll see videos of them performing. And George Harrison was just in the background playing rhythm happily and doing some leads. And Eric Clapton was just happy to be playing lead. And Delaney and Bonnie were great singers. And fantastic. And so so what does that tell you, that Eric Clapton would quit Blind Faith to join these guys? And then he wound up using Delaney's band as Derek and the Dominoes, and that produced the great hit Layla. So that's what was going on like in 1970. So that's who Delaney is. And so you wind up playing with him. And of course, our friend Hank Barrio from Elijah played with Delaney for quite a while also. But when you played with him, Hank was not with him?
Oh, no, Hank wasn't with him. I got on a project called Blue Diamond for MGM.
Mhm.
And I have the album here. If you just take a minute. This is the Delaney Blue Diamond project that I'm on.
Mhm.
And at the time, this was after they divorced. Now you see, this is Victor Pantera right here.
Conguero,
Yeah, the Conguero.
legendary.
Yeah, legendary. And it was great working with him. We had a great band. I met George Harrison. We were in the recording studio, and George, of course, George wants to see what Delaney's doing. And he came and hung out one day. What I remember is the way he shook hands. And he did a little snap, on the handshake. And
Really?
that's
Like on the way out or what?
it's when you put your hand, you snap it. It was some George Harrison thing,
Oh,
But what you're saying about the great people that worked with Delaney, there's a custom in professional music where you honor somebody by giving them your guitar,
right.
right? And so Duane Allman, you left Duane Allman out. Duane Allman played with Delaney and Bonnie as
Right.
well. So Delaney had a guitar by Duane Allman. He had a guitar by Eric Clapton and one that was given to him by George Harrison. When George Harrison died, that guitar was worth $250,000, and that was in 90s, right?
Oh,
When did George die? Year
he died in 2001.
2001. So what happened when George died? Delaney gave Olivia, George's widow, the guitar for free. Delaney was the bass player in the Shin Dogs. Remember Shindig?
Shin Dogs, yeah.
He taught me how to play bass.
Really?
I'm telling you, seriously. He taught me how to play bass. I mean, he's a bass player. He said, Freddie, do this instead of that, And stuff just started to happen for me musically.
So you're saying that you were already playing bass, but he took you to the next level, or what?
Exactly. Let's not forget how I started playing bass by chance, right?
Yeah.
With Kent telling me 1, 3, 5. And musicians out there will know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So Ken Henry got me into Delaney's band, and we were working at the Whiskey A Go-Go one night, and we were doing sound check. And that Whiskey stage is really high.
Right.
And Kent had his guitar strapped on, and he was walking backwards. He fell off the stage.
Oh, wow. Now,
instead of having some compassion, Delaney got pissed off and fired him.
Oh, geez. Jesus.
I had to call the ambulance. Kent lost his sense of smell with that fall.
Wow.
So we got to talk about Kent Henry's guitar playing, because after Genesis broke up, he got into a band with Malcolm Jones, Blues Image, if you remember them. Mm-hmm. And then he started playing with Steppenwolf. And at Richie Podler's recording studio,
American Studios. I recorded there too.
Ken played that iconic solo in Ride, Captain Ride.
Right.
Beautiful.
Great solo.
Just beautiful solo. Now, he was so messed up when he played it that he fell out of the chair, and he was just hanging there, and he still played that solo.
Wow.
Steve Lawrence could do that.
Yeah. We talk about that, whether like sometimes he'd be like really, really drunk or whatever.
Steve, what we haven't gotten to the cave band yet, but you know that my next step was the cave band, because after Delaney's band broke up, I started having kids and I had to get a real job, right? And so I got a real job, and I was just playing on the weekends. But one thing I neglected to tell you, a really good story. After Vietnam, I met a singer-songwriter, guitar player out of the valley, San Gabriel Valley, named Mike Helby. Now, Mike Helby and I used to do pickup jobs, fraternity parties, sorority parties, dances, stuff like that. And our keyboard player was Michael McDonald.
Wow.
And we were making $12 a man.
Jeez.
$12 a man. And there were times when I would just close my eyes when we were doing Georgia or one of those songs, and I would imagine I was on stage with Ray Charles. I would have had the chops.
Amazing. He's great. So do you have anything else to say about the cave band?
The cave band was a project that Manny Esparza,
Okay.
Hank
Lead singer from Elijah.
Yeah, and Hank Barrio, lead guitar player, and Sam Lombardo, the drummer, all from Elijah, and myself, and another guitar player, Chris Morgan, that played more rock, more rockabilly stuff. And that band was nothing more than a dispensary, we called it the Cave Band because we never came out of the cave. We did maybe 2 shows, and one of those shows was some bar in San Gabriel Valley. Nobody there. Steve Lawrence is passed out against the wall, just against the wall, and it's time for him solo. And Tom goes like this and hits him on the side, and Steve and just plays this incredible solo, and then goes back down.
Oh God.
And so when we went to record with the Cave Band, I wrote a song called Metal to Metal, which I sent to you.
Great, good song, funky rock, good rocker, man.
And we went in the recording studio in Whittier, and I swear this must have been some Christian reading room rehearsal place, because it was really square. It wasn't the hip Hollywood recording studio. And the guy, when he saw us and heard us, he didn't know what to expect. And but Stevie, he played the piano. He was a really good keyboard player. And we had a lot of fun. Tom did it too. He's on the record. And Bud Deal, really great saxophone that I would play with later with Little Chris. That's right.
The rockin' record, man. Sounded really good. And that was Manny singing, right?
Yeah. That's
Great singer. And he just passed away recently.
Yeah.
So what about you were going to mention Jerry McGee album produced by Eddie Olmos?
Yeah. What happened in the mid-70s, after I had left Delaney's band, after Delaney's band had dissolved, Eddie called me and he says, "You want to do a record date?" I go, "Yeah." And he says, "Well, here's, be at this studio at a certain time." And so I show up, and it's the Chris Christopherson band, less the bass player. And Eddie got me into that band to record that album, because Eddie wanted a funkier East L.A. sound to it.
All right.
Yeah. Jerry McGee recorded one of Chris Christopherson's songs. Who's to Bless and Who's to Blame? A really great track with Claudia Lanier in the back. I mean, we had top. I mean, I became friends with a keyboard player. It was basically Chris Christopherson's band, and Jerry McGee was the lead guitar player. So he was letting Chris do his own thing. Nice. I never met Chris. He never came in.
So then tell me about Little Chris and the Nightcrawlers.
I got a job back in the early 80s. I had, by 79, my daughter was born in 77. The disco crisis happened at that same time. And so I had a neighbor. I had a neighbor every night that I'd come home at 3 a.m. with beer bottles falling out of the door when you open it. My next door neighbor would walking out to go to work in a nice, clean, white uniform, carrying his lunchbox. And he started work. He had to leave for work at 3 a.m. I go, dude, can you get me a job there? And he got me a job. It was a meat packing plant. And I started out at the very bottom, kind of Lucille Ball, at the end of the assembly line. And I did that. And then I got into my dad's business, which was selling corrugated boxes. And my dad and I used to go to the produce market in the morning and go, "Se vende cajas de cartón, se vende cajas de cartón," But it became a really good, stable job. And I got sober in 1988. Okay, grace of God, all the drugs, all the alcohol went away, and so I started thinking that I couldn't play. I didn't want to play. I was afraid to go play in the bars because I was afraid to be around people drinking. But I was with a friend on a camping trip, and he heard me play the guitar. Said, "Why don't you play?" And I told him. He said, like that, like yeah. Manny used to give the paw. This is the paw. I don't know if you ever heard of it, but so he gives me the paw, right? And so I start. I go to the local music store, and on the stickers for gigs, bass player wanted for a blues band, no drugs or alcohol. I go, man, that's a perfect dress. I rip it off, and I call them, and I said, "So, you guys are friends of Bill?" Yeah, it's a code word, right? For being in a program, right? "You guys are friends of Bill. Who's Bill?" They don't know who Bill. I said, "Well, it says no drugs or alcohol." He goes, "That's because every bass player that's auditioned has been drunk or on drugs." And so it was Little Chris and this other guitar player, and it was the genesis of the band in 1990. And what happened is I got Hank Barrio into the band. I got Sammy Lombardo into the band. And I got Tom Bray into the band.
Yeah, 3 Elijah guys. All right.
Yeah. And so with Little Chris and the Nightcrawlers, it was a really great gig because I was working during the day, doing my job, making good money. And then I have 2 sons. And Friday nights, Friday afternoons, I'd yell, "Load, load," load because I had the PA and everything. And they would fight as to who had to, but my kids would always load the vehicle.
Were you still having back problems? Did they stay permanent?
Oh yeah, to this day I have. I'm disabled. But I live with it, and I don't think there's a person around that doesn't hurt.
No, especially get after over 70, man, stuff hurts.
Yeah. So Little Chris and the Nightcrawlers turned out to be. We got at one point. We got Art Rodriguez, an incredible drummer, to do some gigs with us. Art had worked with the Manhattan Transfer, wow. Ricky Lee Jones, and he had worked a TV show. He was really good, great drummer, and he was my son Andrew's teacher. And so I got him to do a gig with us, and everybody was blown away. It took the band a whole other level. So what happened is the Pachanga Casino is right by us. And Little Chris and the Nightcrawlers got in on the ground floor with the pachanga, because we used to play in their breezeway when there was nobody there. Do shows for nobody.
Yeah.
And we worked our way throughout all of the venues at Pachanga until we had an opportunity to open for John Lee Hooker.
Ooh, all right.
And one night we opened for John Lee. John Lee Hooker had a ambulance, EMS crew with him in case something happened. And we weren't allowed near him. We weren't allowed near him. Now the next night we opened for Buddy Guy.
Nice.
Now that was a little bit, we were allowed to mingle with him, right? But the first thing the bass player for Buddy Guy does, he goes, "Hey, you're a local, right?" I go, "Yeah, I live here. Can you cop me some Coke?" I said, "You're looking at the wrong boy."
So Tom Bray lives in Temecula now. Do you still see Tom a bit?
Not as much as we like to. We talk text and stuff, but like he's lived here for over a year, maybe 2 years, and I've yet to go to his house. He's yet to come over mine. But I play with my son. My son Nathan is a great guitar player. Both of my boys went to Los Angeles Music Academy for free due to my disability from service. And so my son Nathan decided to pursue music. As a matter of fact, he's in Europe right now performing.
Nice.
And my drummer son just got married and gave me my grandchild, So the thing with Little Chris is that we were able to play where we wanted to play because we weren't there to make a living at it.
And you made at least one album, right?
We made two.
Hank sent me. I think Hank sent me both of them. You guys were very kind of bluesy, right? Bluesy.
Yeah, a reviewer likened it to Paul Butterfield meets John Coltrane.
All right. Wow.
Because our sax players were incredible. This is the first CD that we made. It's called Mean Old World. And the album art was done by my friend Scott Seidman, who went to Montebello High School. And this was our last CD, Bone Blue.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I have that one.
Yeah, it's a good one. And Hank produced it. Hank produced it, and Hank's a great producer. Oh, by the way, when we used to rehearse, we would use a Little Ray's studio.
Oh, cool. Yeah, nice place.
You're very nice. And Ray's such a beautiful person.
And world-class singer-performer, R&B dude, man.
Yeah.
Great.
We're talking about Little Ray and the Imperials.
No, Little Ray, you're to Little Ray Jimenez, isn't it?
Yeah. But what was the name of the band?
The Progressions.
The Progressions.
In the 60s, yeah. Little Ray and the Progressions. No, he's still a good friend of mine. He's still singing great. His studio is really top notch. It
is. We were in there 2 years ago. Hank, me, Sammy, and Tom with an English guitar player singer, and we used his Ray's facilities to work up some stuff.
Cool. So how long did you play with them, with the Nightcrawlers?
20 years.
20 years.
Longest band I've ever been in.
When
20
did
years.
Is it still going, or did it end?
No, it ended. It ended quite like David Gilmour and Bad Blood. And so I don't even have any contact with Chris anymore.
But you have no problem with the Elijah guys, though, right?
I love them. They're
I'm saying so it was mainly a conflict with Chris.
Yeah, I'm the guy that brought the Elijah guys into the band, right? If Stevie was still alive, he would have been in that band. Kenny would have been in that band, And we're talking about Kenny Walther and Steve Lawrence that passed, that were in Elijah and Evergreen Blues. and have passed.
Wow. So have you been playing at all since then? Much publicly?
Yeah, I have. I've had this freedom of being able to go back to guitar, right? And I realized that I had been playing strictly bass for 20 years. And when the band broke up, I played a little bass because I was thinking I'd get in another band, but then I decided my days of performing are over. The only time I perform is when my son asked me to come and sit in with him.
Nice.
And it's really funny, Mark. One time, Nathan, my son Nathan, told me, Dad, I'm working this really good club and I want you to come down and sit in with us. So I spent like 2 weeks learning all his songs, right? And I show up to the gig and I hand him the list. I go, here's the list of the songs I know. He goes, you're playing one song, Dad.
Here's your list, one song. It's a little short list. Oh boy.
But it was fun learning. You know, it's always fun to learn a song.
Oh, yeah. Didn't hurt you at all.
No.
Well, cool, man. Can you think of anything else you want to say?
Well, I just want to thank Eddie Olmos and Ken Henry, you know, for giving me a nice career, you know, contributing to it. I played a Gretsch anniversary model, lime green, if you know which one I'm talking about. And when I got drafted, Kent traded me his J50, a D150 or Gibson acoustic, because I needed an acoustic, and we traded. I wish I still had that guitar.
Yeah. So back in the 60s, you know, East L.A., you mentioned playing San Alfonso's, and you must have been going to a lot of those venues, the Kennedy Hall and Little Union, Big Union, and seeing all the
Masonic Temple. I was looking at my book here of the places we played, and I see one gig we did with the Midnighters on our album, our Genesis album. They go, currently Foxy Freddie is serving a limited engagement with Uncle Sam. That's what it says on the album.
Oh, cool.
Because I got drafted and I had to go in. But it was the power it was the power of our management that helped me get into that band. I say that I walked in and I auditioned, but really there was back channels moving to get me into safety. I didn't know that until I met our manager again for like 5 years ago. Our manager, we had lunch. Wow. And he told me, he said, when you were in the Army, we were doing everything to get you out. Now, you know, what are you going to believe, a manager?
Yeah, I know. And do I trust record companies? No. Do they give a shit about us? No. Unless you're making
they're not giving out record deals like they used to.
No, and there's, you know, the record business is different now. It's hard to make money on records, you know, because of all the streaming and the sharing and YouTube and everything.
You know, I had to have back surgery because of my injuries in Viet Nam. And I was put into a hospital bed. They brought a hospital bed, the VA did, into my living room. And I'm going to be in there for 2 or 3 months. And I go, I'm not going to watch daytime TV. and so I started to read. And in reading, the more I read, I thought, I think I could write a book. And you know,
you certainly did.
Came out.
You certainly did. I guess that's about it, huh? I can't think
Mark, it's been a great pleasure to be with you today, this morning, wherever time that you see this.
Yeah. Well, likewise, man, and thank you for doing East LA music stories. And you have a hell of an East LA music story, I'll tell you that.
Well, much respect, Mark. Thank you for keeping this going.
Okay, man. So I'll talk to you next time. Hope to you know, get together in person soon, you know.
I'd love that, man. Let's do a little jamming.
Yeah. Okay,
I love your voice.
Thank you, man. Thank you.
I do. I told you, it reminds me of the British invasion.
Well, the Beatles were my main inspiration, man, I'll tell you.
All right, man.
Well, thank you, man. I'll see you soon.
All right. Blessings. All right.
Bye.